The person you share a wall with. The one you give a polite nod to when you get the mail. You think you know them, but what if you don't? What if that friendly smile is hiding a secret so dark it could shatter your entire world? What you're about to hear 6 chilling stories from people who discovered that the most terrifying monsters are sometimes the ones living right next door. Some of these accounts are inspired by documented events and local legends, while others were submitted by viewers like you. All of them are a terrifying reminder to lock your doors. Story 1. The Man in the Wall. Our first story comes from a man named Mark, who spent 2 years in an apartment complex that seemed perfectly normal, if a little rundown. His story is about his next-door neighbor, a quiet, single father named Sebastian. Mark hardly ever saw Sebastian. When he did, it was just a fleeting, tight-lipped smile in the hallway before his door clicked shut. The only other person in the apartment was Sebastian's young daughter, a little girl Mark only ever saw in glimpses, a flash of a pink jacket, the top of her blonde head in the car. He just figured they were private people. He was a private person himself. Why would he suspect a thing? The first sign something was wrong was the smell. It started faint, a cloying, sickly sweet odor that would drift through the vents on hot days. Mark complained to the building manager, who sent a maintenance guy to check for dead animals in the walls. He found nothing. When Mark cautiously asked Sebastian about it, he just shrugged, claiming he couldn't smell a thing. He even suggested it might be Mark's garbage disposal. Then came the sounds. At first, it was just a weird thumping from Sebastian's apartment late at night. It wasn't loud, just a rhythmic, muffled beat that would go on for a few minutes and then stop. Mark tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a new hobby, or some late-night exercise equipment. But the sounds got stranger. A dragging noise, like a heavy sack of flour being pulled across the floor. And then, the scratching. Faint. But you couldn't miss it. It sounded like it was coming from inside the shared wall between their apartments. Mark's anxiety started to spike. He began pressing his ear against the cool drywall, listening. The scratching was undeniable, now a desperate, frantic sound. One night, he thought he heard a voice, a faint, muffled whimper. He knocked on Sebastian's door. The music that had been blaring was suddenly turned down. Sebastian opened the door, just a crack, his face slick with sweat. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, trying to see past him. "Just fine," Sebastian said, his voice strained. "My daughter's not feeling well. Just trying to keep her comfortable." But Mark hadn't heard a peep from the little girl in weeks, hadn't even seen her. When he asked, Sebastian's friendly mask finally cracked. His eyes went cold. "She's with her mother," he snapped. "Out of state. Now, if you'll excuse me." He slammed the door. That was the lie that unraveled everything. Mark knew for a fact the girl's mother had died the year before. He'd overheard another neighbor talking about it. Sebastian was lying, and whatever he was hiding was in that apartment. The smell was overwhelming now, a thick, putrid stench that stuck to the back of Mark's throat. The scratching had stopped. It was replaced by a low, constant humming from the other side of the wall. Mark couldn't take it anymore. He called the police, but they told him that without hard evidence of a crime, they couldn't force their way in. He was on his own. Fueled by a mix of terror and a grim sense of duty, he made a decision. He waited until he was sure Sebastian was out for the day, went to the hardware store, and bought a small sledgehammer. Back in his apartment, he stood in front of the wall where the smell was strongest, his heart hammering against his ribs. He took a deep breath and swung. The first hit sent cracks, spiderwebbing through the paint. The second broke through the drywall, unleashing a wave of odor so foul it made him gag. He kept swinging, tearing away chunks of plaster. And then he saw it. Behind the drywall was another, crudely built layer of plasterboard, sealed with thick caulk. He used a pry bar to rip it away. The space behind it was pitch black. He turned on his phone's flashlight and pointed it into the void. The beam landed on a small, pale face with wide, vacant eyes. Sebastian's daughter was there, her tiny body wrapped in a pink blanket. He hadn't just hidden her, he had entombed her within the very structure of the building. Police later determined that after years of horrific abuse, Sebastian had killed his daughter in a fit of rage. Unable to get rid of the body, he sealed her in the wall. The scratching Mark had heard wasn't the girl. It was Sebastian, working at night, adding more layers to hide what he'd done. When authorities went to arrest him, they found him in his apartment. He had taken his own life. Mark moved out the very next day, forever haunted by the knowledge of who harmed what had been living just inches away from him. Story 2. The Unlisted Tenant. This next story comes from a college student named Chloe, who learned that intruders don't always break in. Sometimes, they're already living with you. Chloe was thrilled to find a room in a big, off-campus house with 4 other students. It was an old Victorian, a little creaky and drafty, but it had character, and the rent was a steal. The property manager, Mr. Henderson, was a bit odd but seemed harmless. He lived nearby and handled everything. The house had 3 floors and a huge, dusty attic that was strictly off-limits. Mr. Henderson was crystal clear about that, saying it was structurally unsound. A heavy padlock on the attic door seemed to prove his point. For the first few months, everything was normal. College life, late-night study sessions, loud music, arguments over whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. But then, Chloe started noticing small, unsettling things. A milk carton she knew was full would be half empty. The thermostat would be cranked up in the middle of the night. A book she'd left on the couch would show up on the kitchen counter. She asked her housemates, but they all denied it, teasing her about being stressed from classes. One of them, Ben, joked that the house was haunted. Chloe tried to laugh it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She'd be alone in her room and get that distinct, prickling sensation that someone was standing right behind her. Then she started hearing noises from above, faint footsteps, pacing back and forth right over her bedroom. The attic. She knew it was supposed to be empty, she told her housemates, but they couldn't hear it. They said it was just the old house settling, or squirrels on the roof. One night a creak woke Chloe from a deep sleep, not from the ceiling, from her own bedroom door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She lay perfectly still, eyes wide open in the dark, pretending to be asleep. She could hear soft, shallow breathing in the room with her. Someone was there. She squeezed her eyes shut, terrified of what she'd see. If she opened them, a floorboard groaned near her bed. After an agonizing minute, she heard the door creak again as the person left. She didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, she told her housemates what happened, and they finally got worried. Ben checked the attic door. The padlock was still there, untouched. They searched the whole house and found nothing, but they all agreed to start locking their bedroom doors at night. A week later, Chloe was pulling an all-nighter for an exam. Around 2 a.m., she went to the kitchen for coffee. As she passed the living room, she saw a flicker of movement in the reflection of the dark TV screen. A woman was standing in the shadows of the hallway. She was gaunt and thin, with long, matted hair and wide, frantic eyes, wearing what looked like a tattered nightgown. Before Chloe could even scream, the woman lunged. She was shockingly strong, her fingers digging into Chloe's arms like claws. She was muttering something, her voice a hoarse whisper. Chloe's scream brought her housemates running. They managed to pull the woman off her and cornered her in the living room while Chloe frantically called the police. When the officers arrived, the woman was just rocking back and forth on the floor, weeping. The truth that came out was more disturbing than any ghost story. The woman was Mr. Henderson's sister. She suffered from severe, untreated mental health issues. Unwilling to get her proper care, Henderson had been illegally housing her in the locked attic for months. He'd built a small, hidden room for her up there. She had her own key to the padlock and had been secretly moving through the house at night, taking food and watching them while they slept. She had entered Chloe's room not to harm her, but out of a confused, desperate sense of curiosity. Mr. Henderson was arrested for criminal negligence. His sister was finally taken to a facility where she could get the help she desperately needed. Chloe and her housemates broke their lease and moved out immediately. She never forgot the woman's face, or the chilling realization that 4 months, a silent, unlisted tenant had been living just above her head. Story 3. The Girl Next Door. This next account comes from a viewer who asked to be called Quinn. It's a harrowing story of how a friendly neighborly relationship can twist into a terrifying obsession. Quinn had just moved into a modern high-rise in the city. He was 28, focused on his career, and didn't know a soul. His next-door neighbor, Ellie, was one of the first people to welcome him. She was bright, bubbly, and seemed to know everyone. They quickly became friends, grabbing coffee and complaining about their jobs. Quinn found her a little intense, but he just chalked it up to an extroverted personality. Soon, though, that intensity began to feel less like friendship and more like surveillance. Ellie seemed to know things she shouldn't. She knew when he got home from work, even on late nights. She knew he had a date one Friday, texting him, "Have fun," when he hadn't told her he was going out. She would knock on his door moments after he got home, as if she'd been waiting for the sound of his key. He tried to create some distance, politely turning down her invitations, but that only made her more persistent. She started leaving little gifts outside his door: a cupcake, a book she thought he'd like, his favorite coffee he'd only mentioned once. On the surface, it was thoughtful, but it felt suffocating, like she was trying to own a piece of his life. The breaking point came when Quinn couldn't find his phone. He frantically searched his apartment before using a Find My Device app on his laptop. The map loaded, a small blue dot pulsed, showing his phone's location. It was in the apartment right next door. It was in Ellie's apartment. A cold dread washed over him. He went and knocked on her door. She answered with her usual bright smile. "Hey, Quinn, what's up?" He forced a calm he didn't feel. "Hey, this is weird, but my phone's location is showing up in your apartment. Did I maybe leave it here last week?" Her smile flickered. "Oh, no, I don't think so. That's so weird. The app must be glitching." But Quinn saw it. His phone was sitting right there on her kitchen counter. Before he could say a word, she moved to block his view. He made an excuse and left, his mind racing. How did she get it? That night, he changed his locks. The next day, he installed a small security camera inside his apartment, pointed at the front door. He felt paranoid, but he had to know if he was going crazy. 2 days later, the camera gave him his answer. The footage showed Ellie letting herself into his apartment with a key. She didn't steal anything. She just walked around. She touched his things. She sat on his couch. She went into his bedroom and lay on his bed, smelling his pillow. The violation was so profound, Quinn felt sick watching it. He realized she must have copied his key long before he changed the locks. Now, she was picking the new one. Armed with the video, he went to the police. They took a report, but said that without a more direct threat, there wasn't much they could do besides advising him to get a restraining order. When Ellie was served with the order, she didn't get angry. She didn't react at all. For a week, there was total silence. No texts, no knocks. Quinn started to hope it was over. Was wrong. One night, he came home to find his apartment in disarray. Not robbed, but rearranged. His photos were turned upside down. His clothes were laid out on the floor, and on his laptop screen, a single sentence was typed into a blank document. "Yuko Nugget, rid of me." Terrified, he called the police again. While on the phone, he noticed a tiny, blinking red light coming from his bookshelf. Tucked behind a row of books was a small spy camera. He searched his apartment and found 2 more, one under his desk, and another, to his absolute horror, in his bedroom, pointed directly at his bed. She hadn't just been entering his apartment. She had been watching his every move. Suddenly, he heard a noise from the bedroom closet. The police were on the phone, telling him to stay put, but he couldn't. He crept toward the bedroom, his heart pounding, and flung the closet door open. Ellie was crouched inside, holding a knife. Her face was a twisted mask of fury and heartbreak. "You weren't supposed to find out," she whispered. "I was just protecting you. I just wanted to be close to you." She lunged. Quinn barely had time to throw his arm up. The knife sliced deep into his forearm. The pain was blinding. He stumbled back as she came at him again. They struggled in a chaotic, desperate dance until he managed to shove her away. Just as 2 police officers burst through the door, guns drawn. Ellie was committed to a psychiatric facility. The attack and the discovery of her meticulous surveillance left Quinn with deep scars, both physical and emotional. He moved to a different city, trying to escape the memory of the girl next door, whose friendly smile hid a possessive darkness that almost cost him his life. Story 4. The footprints by the window. This next account from a single mother named Janet is a straight-up nightmare. A situation where she had to defend her home and child from a threat that came far too close. Janet and her 8-year-old son, Max, lived in a small rental house on the edge of a neighborhood that was Asaputit in transition. It wasn't the best area, but it was what she could afford. She was cautious, always locking her doors and windows. Her son's bedroom was at the back of the house, looking out over a small, fenced-in yard. One evening, as she was tucking Max in, he told her he was scared. He said he'd heard scratching noises outside his window for the last few nights. Janet did her best to reassure him, checking the lock and telling him it was probably just a raccoon. She promised him he was safe. A few nights later, around 1 a.m., Janet was woken by a loud, splintering crack from the back of the house. That was no raccoon. It sounded like someone was breaking in. Her first thought was Max. She slipped out of bed, her heart hammering, and grabbed the handgun she kept in a lockbox in her nightstand. She prayed she'd never have to use it. She crept down the hallway, holding her breath. As she neared the back of the house, she could hear whispering, multiple voices. Peeking around the corner, she saw the faint glow of a flashlight through the kitchen window. Someone was prying open the back door. She moved silently to a living room window that overlooked the backyard and peered through the blinds. There were 3 of them, all in dark clothes and masks. One was working on the door with a crowbar, while the other 2 stood watch. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a random burglary. They were organized. She backed away from the window and dialed 911, whispering her address to the dispatcher, who told her officers were on their way. But then she heard a new sound, a scraping, scratching noise from the side of the house, right below Max's bedroom window. Her stomach twisted into a knot of pure terror. They weren't just trying the back door, they were trying to get to her son. In that moment, a fierce, protective rage washed over her. She wasn't going to wait. She wasn't going to let them get to Max. She moved to the kitchen window, took a deep, steadying breath, raised the handgun, and tapped the barrel against the glass. The man with the crowbar froze. "I have a gun." Janet's voice was low and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "I have called the police. If you do not leave my property right now, I will shoot you." For a moment, no one moved. The man at the door exchanged a look with his accomplices. Then, one of them laughed. They thought she was bluffing. The man raised the crowbar again, and with a sickening crunch, the door frame splintered. Janet didn't hesitate. She fired a single shot through the window, aiming high and away from them. The gunshot shattered the night. The 3 men froze in genuine shock. This they had not expected. They scrambled over each other, sprinting for the back fence and disappearing into the darkness. Moments later, sirens filled the air. Police found Janet shaking but unharmed in her kitchen. Max was awake and crying, terrified by the noise. When they searched the property, they found the crowbar by the broken door. But it was what they found under Max's window that truly horrified Janet. In the soft dirt of the flower bed were several deep, muddy footprints. There were fresh nicks on the window frame where someone had been trying to pry it open. The scratching Max had heard wasn't an animal. It was them. They had been testing his window for nights, planning their entry point. Police believed the focus on her child's window suggested something far more sinister than a simple robbery. The intruders were never identified. But Janet had her suspicions about a group of men a few houses down who always watched her and Max too closely. Soon after the incident, Janet and Max moved far away, but she never forgot the sight of those footprints in the dirt, a permanent scar on her memory. Story 5. Stealth Mode. Our 5th story comes from a man named Chris, and it's a chilling reminder that horror doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it's the quiet, unassuming person you least expect. Chris uses a wheelchair due to a car accident. After a long recovery, he had finally moved into his own accessible, ground-floor apartment. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace and independence. About a month later, a man named Mr. Harris who was in his late 60s and also used a wheelchair, moved in across the hall. Chris was initially pleased, thinking it would be nice to have a neighbor who understood his daily challenges. Mr. Harris was friendly but distant, offering little more than a tight smile and a nod. Chris noticed he had an odd habit of leaving his front door slightly. A jaw just cracked enough to see a sliver of the hallway. He figured the man was just forgetful. Soon, Chris got an uncomfortable feeling whenever he left his apartment. He'd hear a soft click from across the hall of the sound of Mr. Harris's door closing completely. It happened almost every single time, as if his neighbor was sitting by the door, host watching. The feeling of being observed grew stronger. Chris would be in his living room and see Mr. Harris on his own patio, seemingly reading, but always angled just right to have a clear view into Chris's apartment. He felt like a bug under a microscope. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Why would an elderly man in a wheelchair be stalking him? It seemed absurd, but the unsettling incidents began to add up. One day, Chris got a notification that a package had been delivered, but it wasn't at his door. Just as he was about to contact the delivery service, Mr. Harris's door opened. The old man rolled out, holding Chris's package. "They left this out here," Mr. Harris said in a dry rasp. "Didn't want anyone to take it." Chris thanked him, but a cold dread set in. The delivery photo clearly showed the package right at his own door. Mr. Harris must have taken it. But why? The real terror began when things inside his apartment started being moved. Chris had a very specific system for where everything was placed. A book on his nightstand would be on the other side. The TV remote would be on the left arm of the couch when he always left it on the right. They were tiny changes, but to Chris, they were glaring. Someone was entering his apartment when he was out. He checked the door for a forced entry, but found nothing. He suspected Mr. Hurst had somehow gotten a key or was an expert lock. The idea of this quiet, seemingly frail man entering his sanctuary to just move things was a deeply disturbing psychological game. Chris decided to set a trap. Before leaving for an appointment, he taped a nearly invisible thread of dental floss across the bottom of his doorway. When he returned, his heart pounded as he approached his door. The thread was broken. He didn't go inside. He went straight to the building manager and demanded they call the police. He explained everything: the watching, the package, the moved objects, the broken thread. When the police arrived, they went with Chris to his apartment. As they were about to open the door, Mr. Harris's door swung open. It rode out a look of placid curiosity on his face. "Is everything all right, gentlemen? Ask it." The officer explained they were doing a welfare check. Mr. Harris nodded slowly, his eyes locked on Chris. "I see," he said. "You have to be careful who you trust, son. Some people, they watch you." Police searched Chris's apartment and then noticed his laptop was running a remote access client. A police aid specialist later confirmed that keylogger and screen sharing software had been installed. His every keystroke, every private message, every password had been monitored. The digital trail led directly to the IP address across the hall. When they searched Mr. Harris's apartment, they found a disturbing collection of information on Chris's schedules, his medical records, printouts of his private emails. They also found a set of professional lockpicking tools. Mr. Harris was no feeble old man. He was a retired private investigator who had become a predator in his old age. His wheelchair wasn't a limitation. It was his camouflage. People saw it and let their guard down, never suspecting the obsessive mind behind the quiet facade. He had chosen Chris specifically, seeing a vulnerable target whose life he could infiltrate and control. The experience taught Chris a terrifying lesson. The most dangerous predators are the ones you never see coming. Story 6. The House on Mulberry Street. Our final story takes us to a real place, a house steeped in dark local lore. 65 Mulberry Street in Quitman, Arkansas. For decades, it was home to the legend of Dog Boy, a man named Gerald Bettis, who terrorized animals and even his own parents in the 1950s and 60s. While Bettis is long gone, some say the evil of that house never left. This next account, from a man who grew up next door, explores what happens when that evil finds a new host. The story comes from David, who grew up here in the tailies of Dog Boy. In the early 2000s, the infamous house had sat empty for years, a decaying monument on the corner. Then, one day, a moving truck pulled up. A quiet, older man named Mr. Albright, a retired butcher, moved in. Neighbors were cautiously optimistic that a new resident could finally cleanse the house of its dark reputation. At first, things were quiet, but soon, a familiar and disturbing pattern emerged. Neighborhood pets started going missing. First a cat, then a small dog. People put up flyers but found nothing. David, a teenager at the time, started noticing strange things. Late at night, he'd hear faint whimpering sounds from Mr. Albright's backyard. He also noticed a faint, metallic odor, like a butcher shop, that would hang in the air on still nights. His parents told him he was just letting the old stories get to him, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He knew the history of that place. One afternoon, a stray dog wandered into David's backyard. He went inside to get it some water. When he came back out, the dog was gone, but the gate to his yard, always latched, was slightly ajar. David's heart sank. He looked over at the house next door and saw Mr. Albright's back door just closing. That night, David decided he had to know. Armed with a flashlight, he waited until well after midnight and crept into Mr. Albright's backyard. The metallic smell was stronger here. He crept towards a small, dilapidated shed, where he'd heard the whimpering. The shed door was held by a simple hook latch. His hand shaking, David lifted it and pulled the door open just enough to shine his flashlight inside. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating a scene of pure horror. Cages were stacked against the wall. Inside one was the scruffy stray from his yard, alive but trembling. In another cage was what was left of the missing cat. On a crude wooden table lay a collection of knives and cleavers. Suddenly, the back door of the main house creaked open. Mr. Albright stood silhouetted in the doorway. He didn't yell. He just stood there, watching David. "You shouldn't have come back here, boy," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. David didn't wait to hear another word. He slammed the shed door, dropped the flashlight, and sprinted back to the fence, not stopping until he was safe inside his own house. The police were called. When they searched Mr. Albright's property, they found the shed exactly as David had described. The stray dog was saved, but it was too late for several other animals. Mr. Albright offered no resistance. He simply told them he was finishing what was started. He seemed to believe he was continuing the dark work of Gerald Bettis, the house's original monster. He wasn't a ghost. He was a successor. The evil of 65 Mulberry Street hadn't died with Dog Boy. It had just been waiting for someone new to let it in. The unsettling truth is that we never really know what happens behind our neighbors' closed doors. The people we see every day can harbor the darkest secrets. Thanks for listening. If you have a true, unsettling story of your own you'd like to share, you can submit it to the email address in the description below. For more stories that explore the darkness that lurks just next door, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Stay safe out there.